well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm so glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking about, a tale of two cities in New York, Rochester and Syracuse, and all of the vaunted gun control laws that are doing a great job of stopping, ordinary responsible citizens from exercising their Second Amendment rights. In terms of stopping acts of violence, not so much. We will get to that in just a moment. But before we do, I know you guys have definitely noticed the U.S. dollar continues to buy less, right? Last year, the average IRA and 401k balance fell by more than 20%. If we've learned anything from the past few years, it's that anything can and will happen. Here's something that may help: a gold IRA. Gold may be a great option for you. That's right, physical gold in your IRA. Many central banks are buying tons right now. What does that tell you? Well, Augusta Precious Metals is a gold IRA company that offers its customers the opportunity to invest in gold. You can call Augusta Precious Metals and learn how a gold IRA can help you. If you've saved $100,000 or more for retirement, call Augusta Precious Metals and get the free ultimate guide to gold IRAs. Tell them you heard it here on our show, and they'll give you a free gold coin when you open up a gold IRA. Contact Augusta Precious Metals and diversify your retirement today. Call 855-222-4997. That's 855-222-4997. Again, 855-222-4997. So let's talk about what's going on in New York here. Last year, after the Supreme Court's decision in Bruen struck down the state's may-issue concealed carry system, we saw a flood of applicants all across the state. And then in September, new rules took effect. Governor Kathy Hochul said, listen, the new rules apply for everybody, by the way, who's in the pipeline. If you've not been approved by the time these new rules took effect, sorry, the new rules apply. You basically got to start all over again. Several county clerks have said, nah, that's not the case. And it really does seem to be mass confusion still about what's going on. Now, you would think, again, almost a year, about a year later, that would be sort of a moot point anyway, right? I mean, it's been a year. So surely everybody who was in the pipeline last June or July or August has already been approved. Well, no, that's not the case. Not only are we still seeing lengthy wait times in some counties, but the number of new applicants is actually a lot lower than what it was this time last year under the old may issue system, at least in Monroe County, where Rochester First reports that since the state lawmakers passed the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, county officials and those who teach the mandatory classes have noticed a severe drop in applicants for concealed carry permits. When you call the Monroe County Pistol Permit Office, a recording informs you that the wait right now is anywhere from 9 to 16 months for your application to be processed. Now, the clerk, Jamie Romeo, says that the wait times have been dropping 6 to 8 months, sometimes to a year that it can take. But oftentimes it depends on the background investigations that have to go on. There are still some cases that are getting processed from the surge in 2021. And before the new law took effect, those are still being processed through law enforcement background in the courts. So not only do we have confirmation from the county clerk there in Monroe County, New York, that people have been waiting over a year and are waiting over a year to obtain their concealed carry license. Apparently, there are some folks who've been waiting going on 2 years, maybe 2 years or more, if they applied back in 2021 during the surge and have yet to be approved. Now, again, this is not what the Supreme Court envisioned when it handed down the Bruen decision. The idea was that states like New York were going to quit playing games with the right to carry, and that a lot of folks who were previously ineligible because they could not demonstrate some good cause or justification beyond, it's scary out there and I want to be able to protect myself. Those folks were now supposed to be able to not only get a license, but they were supposed to be able to carry. Well, as you know, New York decided, it's not going to happen. So fine. We'll remove the, justifiable need restriction. And instead, we'll put up a bunch of new hurdles for would-be gun owners. We're going to increase the training. We're going to increase the expense of that training. We're going to comply with, come up with all kinds of mandates that you must comply with when you're applying, including revealing your social media We got to have character references, right? And we'll hinge our decision on proof of your good moral character as opposed to your justifiable need. And oh yeah, by the way, if you do manage to get a carry license, it's going to be a felony for you to carry almost anywhere. All those places that formerly were open to you, we've now decided that they're sensitive places. And setting foot in any of those locations, well, that's a felony offense, punishable by years in prison. So yeah, have fun with your concealed carry license. That's, again, what the state of New York and states like New Jersey, Maryland, Hawaii, California, and others are trying to do in response to the Bruen decision. And again, in Monroe County, New York, we are seeing the consequences here, where folks are not just having to wait an unconscionably long time for their carry license, but fewer people are simply applying altogether. David Jenkins is a firearms instructor at Rochester Personal Defense. He says as of June 1st, from what I hear, just under 300 people have applied, whereas this time last year it was over 700 or so. He said, I think a lot of it is the cost of the course and the time factors of the course. They've got to take 2 long days out of their life. Again, 18-hour training course in New York State now. That includes 2 hours of live fire range time. And Jenkins says it's just having a chilling effect. Although he does note that there are people, particularly more folks from Rochester itself, who are applying, even though the overall numbers are down. He says because of what's been going on in the city lately, the general comment is that there's no control. It's a free-for-all, and people are scared, which again, shouldn't be the case if all of New York's gun control laws were working the way that lawmakers promised, right? Not just the Bruen Response Bill, but I mean the SAFE Act passed a decade ago, which instituted a ban on so-called assault weapons, registration requirements for every pistol owner. We had to re-register your pistol. There was the magazine ban. There were even some provisions of the SAFE Act that have not yet taken effect, like ammunition background checks. But in the decade since the SAFE Act was passed, New York lawmakers have steadily adopted more and more gun control laws. Again, all of them publicly, the reason for this is public safety, right? Fewer crimes, fewer violent criminals, going to make it harder for criminals to access firearms. What's happened instead is that it's become much more difficult to exercise your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, but the criminals don't really seem to be touched. While, in fact, while Rochester first was reporting on the decline in concealed carry licenses, the fewer number of responsible gun owners who are, again, trying to carry because they know that the fix is still in, the police in Syracuse, New York, investigating a scene of mass violence at a pop-up party. 13 people shot, stabbed, or struck by a vehicle in Syracuse over the weekend. The police chief says it happened at a pop-up party that was publicized on social media. Syracuse police said officers responded to a shots fired complaint. About 12:22 Sunday morning, they discovered about 200 people gathered for a party that had been promoted on social media. Syracuse Police Chief Joseph Cecile said upon arrival, they discovered a tremendously chaotic situation. 200 or so people in the street, people fleeing in all directions, both on foot and in cars. They found over a dozen, 13 is the actual number of victims, gunshot victims, stabbing victims, and also victims that have been hit by those vehicles that were fleeing the scenes. And the chief says not the first time a party like this has happened. He said every weekend in various parts of the city, there are pop-up parties, typically advertised on social media. Chief says sometimes police find out about them, other times they don't. He says their understanding of this one, it's very early information, is that it was a bunch of high school students who had just graduated and also some older individuals who had come back from college that were meeting here on this block. Now, we don't know all of the ages of everyone involved, but if we're talking about high school graduates and maybe even some college students, generally speaking, you're going to be talking about individuals who are not old enough to lawfully purchase or possess a firearm under New York state law. According to KSLA, the ages of all 13 victims who were either shot, stabbed, or hit by a car ranged from 17 to 25. So there were some legal adults in that crowd, but there's no word on if there were anybody who actually legally possessed a firearm there in that crowd. Cecile said, with as many victims as we have here, we also probably have quite a few suspects. So I think this is going to be down the road before any information about those suspects might be released here. Hopefully we do learn more. But again, one thing is crystal clear. None of the gun control laws in place in New York stopped this act of mass violence this past weekend, any more than any of California's gun control laws stopped a mass shooting in San Francisco's Mission District. These laws are not aimed at violent offenders. And every time a lawmaker says, well, we got to pass this law for public safety, ask yourself, why are these aimed at people who are already trying to obey the law? Why aren't we doing something about people who violate our public safety? Why aren't we passing laws again that are aimed at toughening up the consequences for those violent offenders, for repeat offenders? Instead, states like New York and California continually try to make it harder for good people to be able to protect themselves, and the bad actors out there continue living their lives with little fear of consequences. Why would they? Again, the clearance rate for non-fatal shootings, well below 50% in this country. In fact, the clearance rate for homicide in a lot of jurisdictions at or below 50%, meaning you got a better than average chance of getting away with murder. But rather than address these issues, again, the anti-gun lawmakers in places like Albany, New York, or Sacramento, California, simply want to make it harder, more legally dangerous, and downright illegal for you to be able to exercise your fundamental right to protect yourself and your loved ones. Now, turning our attention to today's recidivist report, our good deed of the day, and our armed citizen story, we'll start there with a case out of Minnesota. And again, we just saw this. Lawmakers passed this omnibus public safety bill. Sure, there's some money in there, extra money to try to increase the number of police officers in places like Minneapolis and St. Paul. But for the most part, the big takeaway from the omnibus public safety bill were the gun control measures included. The red flag law, the backdoor gun registration scheme that comes as part of the universal background check provision. Again, DFL majorities in the House and Senate in Minnesota decided to take aim at legal gun owners as opposed to dealing with the real mess in the criminal justice system. So here you got this case out of the Twin Cities. Man on probation for fire at homeless shelter, now charged with arson at a St. Paul mosque. Yeah, probation for an earlier act of arson. And as it turns out, the criminal justice system has repeatedly cut this guy a break. According to ATF investigators, this gentleman, Saeed Murakizi, told ATF officers that he's Muslim, said he, quote, burned the building as a form of protest because of other Muslims in the community having to sleep outside in the cold. He said that the building is not serving anyone, but the people need it. The fire at the Tawhid Islamic Center of Minnesota occurred Wednesday morning. Thankfully, nobody was injured. The mosque under construction as it was being remodeled. Police arrested Murakizi on Wednesday night, found a substance that later tested positive for methamphetamine. It was back in 2020. He was arrested in a fire at a St. Paul homeless shelter. He was taken to a hospital for a mental health evaluation. According to newspaper accounts, this occurred back in August of 2020 at the Mary Hall, which is a shelter for homeless adults. Firefighters found a small fire burning in Murakizi's room. He was, quote, agitated, denied him entry into the room, and threatened to jump out of the fourth floor window. When firefighters eventually gained access, they found a pile of burning clothes and determined that the fire was intentionally set with a lighter. So Murakizi pleaded guilty last May of 2022, and was sentenced last November to 18 months in prison. Yeah. But that prison sentence was stayed. So Murakizi could have been behind bars. But the judge in this case said, we're not gonna. He had also been sentenced to 320 days in the Ramsey County Workhouse, which he had already served, and as well as 1 year probation. So, again, 18-month prison sentence last November, 2 years probation. About 3 months after he's given that sentence, he's hauled back in court in March of this year for a probation violation. He was ordered to serve 30 days in the county workhouse with credit for 10 days already served. Then on Monday of last week, before his arrest, 2 days before his arrest, he was in Hennepin County Court, pleaded guilty in other cases. He had been charged back in December with using a broom to break a restaurant window in Minneapolis. In that case, he received a 13-month prison sentence, again, a week ago, which was stayed again, and 43 days in the Hennepin County Workhouse, which he had already served, and then was put on probation for 3 years. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Now, maybe Mr. Murkese has some substance abuse issues. Maybe he's got some mental health issues. I don't know much about this case, but I would certainly be willing to listen to the argument that prison is not the right place for him. But if that's the case, then a mental institution needs to be where he is. And that's not happening either. Instead, you've got this catch and release system in Minnesota where this guy keeps getting arrested, thankfully for crimes that haven't injured anybody yet, but crimes that could easily have done so. He is sentenced to prison. That sentence is stayed. He is placed on probation. He violates probation. He is arrested. He is charged. He takes a guilty plea. He is sentenced to prison. That sentence is stayed. He is placed on probation. I mean, again and again and again, this has happened. And it sounds like this time, the cycle may be interrupted because Murkese can be facing federal charges. But again, this is how the criminal justice system works in Minnesota right now. You go and you try to burn down a homeless shelter, burn down a mosque, bust up a restaurant, no consequences. Try to sell your gun to your longtime neighbor without driving 20 or 30 miles to the nearest sheriff's department so you can get your permit to purchase certificate, or even further to the nearest gun store so you can put your longtime buddy through a background check. Oh, they'll prosecute that. Yeah, they'll definitely charge you for not doing that. But again, arson? What's the harm? That seems to be the attitude among the Democrats in Minnesota. And with that attitude firmly ensconced in place, it's no wonder that violent crime is on the rise across the state. Today's armed citizen story from Chicago, where a would-be assailant picked the wrong target. An off-duty police officer, who was out of uniform, just looked like, average Joe. As it turns out, he had a firearm with him. 25-year-old Carlos Negretti was already on bail for a pending felony gun case at the time, according to CWB Chicago. He's now facing additional felony counts. They were filed on Sunday afternoon. According to prosecutors, the officer had changed out of his uniform at the end of his shift. About 10:30 Friday night, he drove to McDonald's to get something to eat. Surveillance footage shows the officer sitting in his car in the parking lot as Negretti pulls up beside him in an SUV shortly after 11 p.m. Negretti exchanged some words with the off-duty cop and then made some hand gestures. Prosecutors say were gang signs. Situation escalated when Negretti pulled out a handgun, pointed it at the officer. Believing that he was about to be shot, the officer pulled out his firearm and shot Negretti in the head. Despite his injuries, Negretti was able to drive away. Officer reported the incident to the Chicago police. Negretti drove himself to Mount Sinai Hospital, arrived there about 11:30 p.m. in the same SUV. At that point, I guess he wasn't able to drive himself, but he drove off. At some point, an accomplice or a buddy hopped in the driver's seat because by the time they arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital, Negretti was in the passenger seat. Investigators found 4 spent shell casings inside the SUV. They did not find a gun in the car or in Negretti's possession, according to prosecutors. Negretti ordered to pay a $20,000 bail deposit, and he can get out on electronic monitoring, even though he's facing charges of aggravated assault, aggravated unlawful use of a weapon, as well as possession of cannabis. I mean, kind of a minor charge there. However, the judge did order him held without bail for violating bond in a felony gun case that is still pending in court. In that incident, according to CBB Chicago, Negretti and another man pulled up to a home that police officers were staking out in preparation for a search warrant back in January. Suspecting that the person targeted in the search warrant was in the vehicle, officers detained the driver and arrested Negretti as he ran towards the home with an open bottle of Modelo. Prosecutors said both men had firearms. when they were caught. McCarthy presided over, the same judge, by the way, who presided over Negretti's bail hearing this past weekend, presided over his earlier bond hearing, set bail at just $5,000, posted 10% of that, $500, and went home. And now, once again, on the radar of police. Thankfully, the off-duty officer not injured, and thankfully, the individual who was targeted by Negretti was able to fight back and defend himself in this situation. Now, finally, today's good deed of the day, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A former firefighter who was visiting Waterloo, Iowa, and just happened to run across a fire and was able to alert the family to get out, thankfully without any loss of life, although I think at last report there is still, unfortunately, a missing pet around. Rob Sullivan, former firefighter from Cedar Rapids, now lives in Red Wing, Minnesota, said he was visiting a friend in Waterloo when he noticed smoke coming from a home around 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. He said I had a lot of smoke around the house. I thought, that's a little more than a grill would be. So he pulled up, he calls 911, knocks on the door. He said, a girl answered the door. I said, your house is on fire. Both occupants of the home able to make it out safely. Crews with the Waterloo Fire Rescue did find a fire burning upstairs. They were able to retrieve one cat. I guess two other cats remain missing, but hopefully they will quickly return. Cause of the fire has not been determined. But again, it sounds like thanks to the quick thinking of Rob Sullivan and a nose perhaps that recognizes when things are not right involving flames, all of the humans are okay. And hopefully the fire caught quickly enough that the home not a total loss. But in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Rob Sullivan of Red Wing, Minnesota, we thank you for your very good deed. Now, that is all the time for this edition of Bruen Arms Scam & Company. But the good news is the good news is it's only Monday, but when is that ever good news? The good news is we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Bruen Arms Scam & Company. In fact, we'll be back for 3 more this week. And coming up on Wednesday, don't forget, we're going to be talking with the founder of BioFire, Kai Klepfer, saying a lot of the right things. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into the positions that BioFire and its founder are taking when it comes to things like California's Unsafe Handgun Act, smart gun mandates, magazine bans. I want to know a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper, so we'll be doing that on Wednesday. But we'll see you back here tomorrow as well. Don't forget to check out BruenArms.com throughout the day. We'll keep you up to date on all of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. And if you'd like me to see, I'd always encourage you to become a VIP member as well. Just go to BruenArms.com/subscribe. Use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your VIP membership. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.